Have you ever believed in something so firmly, so unquestioningly, that the very idea of doubting it felt almost like betraying the world you came from? And then one single moment, one human encounter, shattered that certainty and forced you to see reality with new eyes. It is unsettling when it happens. It leaves you with questions you didn't ask for and emotions you were not ready to feel. But sometimes, that moment becomes the doorway to a truth far bigger than you ever imagined. For decades, there has been a quiet whisper in military circles across the world, a whisper shaped by pride, fear, and the heavy weight of history. Israel has one of the most formidable, best-trained militaries on the planet, and because of that, many around the world assume it already has all the answers, all the methods, all the discipline it needs. So when talk began spreading that Israeli soldiers were being trained using methods inspired by the Philippines, most dismissed it instantly. Impossible, unlikely, unnecessary. The world had already agreed on a hierarchy long ago, or so people thought. And hierarchies, once built, tend to become illusions that people cling to. Yet the illusion cracked the moment a certain general quietly admitted something that startled even his closest circle. He spoke almost in a whisper, but the words had weight. He said that the most unexpectedly effective training philosophy he had encountered did not come from Silicon Valley strategists or European academies. It came from the Filipino spirit, not from weapons, not from technology, not from budgets, but from the people, the resilience, the faith. The way Filipinos confront both danger and life with a kind of courage that cannot be taught in classrooms. And that confession was surprising, but it was not the shock. The real shock came from someone else entirely, from a man named Yonatan Halavi, a 38-year-old Israeli officer who had spent most of his adult life believing that the strength of a soldier depended solely on three things: discipline, fearlessness, and strategy. He believed this because these were the rules he grew up with, rules shaped by conflict, by loss, by geography, by forces far larger than himself. Rules reinforced by the uniform he wore since he was 19. He believed those rules so deeply that he used to laugh, quietly, respectfully, but undeniably, when foreign officers talked about soft strengths like community, compassion, or faith. Not because he looked down on them, but because, to him, those things felt like luxuries, rare, fragile, the kind of things you preserved at home but did not bring to the battlefield. Then something happened, something he almost never talks about, something that marked him in a way he never expected. A moment of human breakage that soldiers are never trained for. It was a mission he rarely describes in full, a night where everything went wrong, a night where the weight of decisions crushed him in ways bullets never could. And after that night, he felt something slipping away inside him. Not courage, not strength, something deeper, something quieter. The very thing that makes a soldier choose to fight not just with his body, but with his heart. He did not understand it then, but he would understand it later, much later. In the months that followed, he trained harder than ever, but something remained broken. He moved through the routines, the drills, the commands, but there was a hollowness he couldn't shake. He told no one. Soldiers rarely do. The world expects them to absorb everything without leaking a single crack. But the cracks were there. Small, invisible, growing. Then came an unexpected suggestion from a visiting advisor, an old friend of his father, a man who had traveled across Asia and spent time observing foreign training programs. He mentioned, almost casually, that if Yonatan wanted to rediscover the core of what it meant to serve, not as a machine, but as a human being, he should look toward the Philippines. At first, Yonatan almost dismissed it. What could possibly be found there that he could not find at home? But the advisor looked at him with a seriousness that made him pause. He said one phrase that stayed with him. The strongest soldiers are shaped not just by what they fight, but by what they love. And something about that sentence rested heavily in Yonatan's chest. He did not know it then, but that moment, quiet, almost accidental, was the turning point of his life. It was the first faint ripple of a journey he never planned to take, a journey that would lead him to a place he had barely studied, barely understood, and yet would soon become the place that restored something he didn't even realize he had lost. A journey that would eventually explain why Israel, one of the toughest militaries in the world, began training its soldiers the Filipino way. He did not speak about the suggestion for weeks, almost embarrassed that he was considering it. But as the weight in his chest grew heavier, he found himself revisiting that single sentence again and again until it echoed during moments of silence. The strongest soldiers are shaped not just by what they fight, but by what they love. It felt strange to him, almost naive. Yet it was the only thing that didn't sound hollow in a world where even victory sometimes felt like loss. Yonatan's struggle was deeper than fatigue. It went back to childhood memories carved by sirens, shelters, and a sense of danger so constant that it felt normal. He remembered nights when he woke up to the sound of explosions in the distance, his mother holding him close while telling him that everything would be all right, even when she didn't fully believe it. He remembered a cousin who never returned from service. He remembered the day he put on the uniform for the first time, and felt the entire weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a second skin. Through the years, he learned to hide every sign of fear, to swallow every moment of uncertainty, to endure even when endurance felt impossible. But after that one mission, the one he refuses to recount, it wasn't fear that haunted him. It was emptiness, a loss of purpose, a strange quietness where meaning used to be, and that was far more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. He tried different things to recover himself. He buried himself in routine, hoping discipline would patch up the parts of him that had cracked. He accepted a short assignment abroad, but even in the training bases of Japan and the United States, he felt the same numbness. He sat through talks with foreign commanders, hoping one of them would reignite the fire inside him, but their words passed through him without leaving a mark. Everywhere he went, people praised methods, strategies, technologies, but none of that brought back the part of him that felt gone. One day he found himself in a small clinic in Tel Aviv, sitting across from a doctor who noticed the exhaustion beneath his carefully constructed calm. She asked him questions he didn't want to answer, but there was something strangely gentle in her voice. She mentioned that she had once worked with Filipino nurses in a hospital in the Middle East, and that they had a way of caring that went beyond medicine. A warmth, a presence, a belief that healing was not just physical. Her eyes softened as she spoke, as if she was remembering something precious. And Yonatan, who had not felt moved by anything in months, felt something stir faintly within him. The next day, while walking through a crowded street market, he overheard two Filipino caregivers talking, laughing with a kind of lightness he envied. Their laughter didn't feel careless. It felt resilient, as if they had known hardship and still chose joy. He found himself standing still, listening without understanding why. It was around this time that a military colleague returned from a short humanitarian cooperation program in Manila. The colleague, usually stoic, spoke with a tone Yonatan did not recognize. He talked about the Filipinos he met, about a community that welcomed strangers as if they were family, about a strength that was both quiet and unbreakable. He said that the way Filipino soldiers trained was different, Not weaker, not softer, different, human. And something about that difference stayed with Yonatan long after the conversation ended. He began to wonder, almost reluctantly, if the answer he had been searching for, something to mend the invisible fractures within him, might be found not in bigger armies or stronger doctrines, but in a place he had barely thought about. A place built on faith, community, and a kind of hope he had not felt in years. And though he did not yet understand it, the Philippines was already calling to him. He did not make the decision suddenly. It unfolded slowly, like a quiet thread pulling him in a direction he didn't fully comprehend yet. But one morning, after another restless night, and another failed attempt to convince himself he was fine, he booked a flight to Manila. He didn't tell many people. Not out of secrecy, but because he barely knew how to explain it. How do you tell others that your heart is searching for something your mind cannot name? When he arrived in the Philippines, the first thing that struck him was the air. Warm, humid, and oddly welcoming, as if the place itself was inhaling and exhaling with the rhythm of the people. Manila was loud and alive, and though he was tired from the long flight, he felt something loosen inside him, something that had been clenched for months. It surprised him, but he did not resist it. His first direct encounter with Filipinos came at the airport when a young porter offered to help with his bag. It was nothing extraordinary, a simple gesture. Yet it held a sincerity that felt unfamiliar, not transactional, not forced, genuine. The porter smiled with the kind of smile that didn't need a reason. And for the first time in months, Yonatan felt seen not as a soldier, not as a problem to solve, but simply as a person arriving in a new place. A military contact had arranged for him to visit a training facility outside the city, a small cooperative program that involved humanitarian response exercises. He expected efficiency, discipline, structure. What he did not expect was the quiet strength of the people who welcomed him. They greeted him with handshakes and warm nods, their faces shaped by sun, work, and a kind of hopefulness he had not encountered elsewhere. He felt strangely at ease among them. In the first days, he simply observed. He watched how Filipino soldiers trained, rigorous but grounded, tough but compassionate. There was discipline, but not the harsh kind he was used to. It was discipline that grew from purpose, not pressure. They moved with unity. They laughed in between drills. They supported the weakest without humiliating them. And when someone stumbled, no one shouted. Instead, hands reached out quickly, instinctively, as if helping was as natural as breathing. He found himself drawn to a particular officer, Captain De Los Reyes, a man perhaps 10 years older than him, with sharp eyes and a calm voice. They spoke after one session, and Yonatan asked how he maintained such composed authority. The captain paused, thinking carefully, then said something simple. "We train hard, but we don't forget we are human. Strength without heart is just force, and force alone does not win battles." It was such a gentle answer that Yonatan almost laughed at the simplicity of it, but the captain's eyes told him it was a truth born from experience. One afternoon, during a humanitarian simulation, he noticed something even more surprising. A group of local civilians, mostly elderly, had come to watch. As the soldiers practiced rescue drills, the civilians weren't afraid. They weren't distant. They cheered lightly, smiled proudly, and treated the soldiers like sons and daughters. Yonatan could not understand it. Back home, civilians respected soldiers, yes, but there was a heavy tension between the two worlds. Here, there was warmth instead of fear. Connection instead of distance. Something about that scene touched him deeply. It reminded him of what service was supposed to mean, long before politics and conflict clouded everything. He stood there silently, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the sounds of laughter and encouragement surround him. It felt like being wrapped in a memory he never had but desperately needed. Over the following weeks, he visited communities, churches, training sites, and small municipal offices where Filipino officers worked closely with civilians. And everywhere he went, he encountered a kind of softness wrapped around steel. People who prayed before missions, people who believed in miracles and yet fought with grit, people who carried hardship with a smile, not because life was easy, but because hope was their armor. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something inside him began to reinflate. The numbness started to fade. The heaviness began to lift. He felt the beginnings of trust, the faint return of meaning, the quiet stirring of purpose. It frightened him, but it also awakened him. He came to the Philippines looking for answers. But what he found instead was a people who reminded him what it meant to feel alive. As the days blended gently into one another, Jonathan found himself moving through the Philippines, not as a visitor analyzing techniques, but as a man slowly rediscovering the pieces of himself he thought were gone forever. What began as observation turned into immersion. He joined morning drills, not because he had to, but because he wanted to feel whatever it was that made these soldiers so different. And with every sunrise over the training field, every breath of humid air filling his lungs, he felt layers of heaviness peeling off from within. It was a simple thing that changed him first: a prayer. Before one particularly demanding exercise, the Filipino soldiers gathered in a circle, heads bowed, one of them offering a quiet invocation. It was not dramatic or ritualistic. It felt like a conversation between exhausted humans and a God they trusted deeply. When the prayer ended, they broke the circle with soft smiles, slapping each other's shoulders as if saying, "Whatever happens today, we face it together." Jonathan stood slightly outside the group, watching. Something in that moment struck him like a soft blow. He had not prayed in years, not out of rebellion, but because he had forgotten what faith felt like. Later that same day, during a climb up a muddy hillside, his foot slipped just enough that he staggered backward. Before he could regain balance, two Filipino soldiers grabbed him, one holding his arm, the other steadying his back. Their actions were automatic, instinctive, without hesitation or calculation. In the militaries he had known, help came only after being requested. Here, he realized, help came before the fall. That small moment lingered in him long after the mud dried on his boots. He began spending time with local families who lived near the facility. They would invite him to dinner, insisting he sit, eat, rest. One evening, after a long day of training, he joined a family in their small home with a tin roof and a wooden table. They served rice, chicken, and vegetables, dishes humble yet made with a warmth he had almost forgotten existed. The grandmother of the house placed food on his plate with the care of someone feeding her own grandson. And when Jonathan tried to insist she eat first, she laughed softly and said, "You are our guest, so tonight you are family." He had no answer, only a sting in his eyes he tried to hide. Everywhere he turned, there was a softness that did not weaken people, but strengthened them. A kindness that did not replace discipline, but fueled it. A resilience that did not erase pain, but walked with it. He saw Filipino soldiers train under rain that fell like sheets of water, yet laugh afterward as if they had just finished a game. He saw them tend to blisters on each other's feet, with a gentleness that belonged more to caregivers than warriors. He saw them break bread and share stories, listening with full hearts even when exhausted. And he witnessed something else, something he never expected. During a community outreach day, he watched a Filipino soldier kneel to speak to a frightened child who had scraped her knee. The soldier spoke softly, wiped the child's tears, bandaged her wound, then carried her to her mother with tenderness that felt almost holy. Jonathan felt his chest tighten again. But this time it was not pain, it was recognition. He remembered why he became a soldier in the first place, to protect, to serve, to bring safety where fear once lived. Somehow, amid the chaos of life, he had lost that truth. But here, in a simple act of kindness between soldier and child, he found it again. It built slowly, like the rising warmth before dawn. The shift inside him, the settling of something that had been trembling for months. He felt trust growing like a fragile sprout breaking through dry earth. He felt hope returning with a quiet insistence. And more than anything, he felt a longing to belong, not in geography, but in spirit, to this culture, this strength, this way of being human even in the hardest battles. One evening, as he stood outside watching the last colors of sunset melt into the horizon, he whispered to himself without meaning to, "I have never seen this anywhere else." And he meant every word. In that moment, he knew something profound had already happened inside him. The Philippines had begun to restore him in ways he never asked for, but desperately needed. And he let it happen, without resistance, without fear, without questioning the miracle of it. Weeks passed, though Jonathan rarely kept track of days anymore. What mattered was not the schedule, but the quiet transformation unfolding inside him. A transformation he felt in the steadiness of his breath, in the calmness in his shoulders, in the way he woke up each morning, no longer dreading the weight of consciousness. One dawn, as he joined the Filipino soldiers for another round of drills, he realized something astonishing. He felt present, fully, deeply. For the first time in months, his mind was not drifting into the shadows of memory or spiraling into questions of meaning. He was simply alive, doing what he loved, surrounded by people who reminded him how to love it again. He noticed the change most clearly during a rescue simulation near a coastal town. The scenario required the team to enter a damaged structure and assist a group of volunteers acting as trapped civilians. It was only an exercise, yet the Filipino soldiers approached it with a seriousness colored by compassion. They did not move like machines pursuing efficiency. They moved like protectors who understood the weight of human life. Watching them, Jonathan felt something inside him click back into place. His instincts sharpened, his focus returned. And when he stepped into the structure to help lift a mock casualty, he realized he felt no hesitation, no emptiness, no fear of the silence that had haunted him since that night back home. Later, when the exercise ended, he stood alone for a moment, letting the breeze from the sea wash over him. He whispered a quiet admission to himself. The Philippines did not fix me. They reminded me I was never broken. That truth sank into him like sunlight warming cold stone. He began spending more time with Captain De Los Reyes, not out of duty but from genuine desire to understand the philosophy behind Filipino resilience. One evening, as they shared coffee under the dim glow of a single bulb hanging outside the barracks, Jonathan asked the question that had been forming slowly in his heart. What makes people here so strong? The captain smiled, the kind of smile that carried both joy and sorrow. We have suffered much, storms, loss, hardship, but we never let suffering define us. Faith keeps us standing, family keeps us grounded, and hope gives us courage to move forward. Then he added something Jonathan never forgot. Strength is not measured by how hard you fight alone. It is measured by how deeply you can love despite the pain. That sentence struck him harder than any battlefield memory ever had. The transformation revealed itself little by little. He found himself laughing more, eating more, sleeping more peacefully. He found he could look people in the eye again without feeling the need to hide behind a soldier's mask. He felt the warmth of community seeping into the cold corners of his soul, warming them gently, steadily. He felt a longing to carry these lessons home, to infuse his own team with the humanity he rediscovered here. One Sunday, he attended a local mass with some of the soldiers. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. The music rose like a prayer woven from the voices of people who believed with their entire hearts. And in that small church, surrounded by strangers who welcomed him without question, he closed his eyes and let the softness embrace him. He felt a lump rise in his throat as a realization settled on him. This country had given him something his own strength could not reclaim. Not bravery, not discipline, but faith. In life, in people, in purpose. As he prepared to return to Israel for a short reassignment, he walked through the training grounds one last time. The sun was low, casting golden light across the field. Filipino soldiers laughed nearby, their voices warm and alive. He paused, taking in the sight, letting it imprint itself onto his memory. He knew he would return, not because of duty, but because part of him now lived here. This land had become a quiet anchor for his spirit. And as he stepped away, he whispered something that came from the deepest part of him, a truth he wanted to carry home, a truth shaped by every smile, every prayer, every act of kindness he had witnessed. The Philippines did not just help me survive, they taught me how to live again.